For many years, I've collected reports from the Soviet and Russian military about UFOs. Some of them are very fascinating, and I have files that I go to, and sometimes I just go to the original Russian presentation or information and translate it into English as I go along. And I'd like to do it now. I have some of the most interesting information, like I said, in my files, and unlike in other countries, there was a period in the former Soviet Union and Russia when top Soviet and Russian commanders and generals came out with presentation about UFOs and their opinions. It is very interesting. For example, Gennady Reshetnikov, he passed away in 2016. He was a Soviet and Russian military leader, a Colonel General of Aviation back in 1992, and he commanded the Tversk Military Academy from 1991 to 1999. He reported something that I've talked about before, the so-called cigar over Norilsk and in northern Russia, and some other stories. Gennady Reshetnikov described that in his experience there were very mysterious incidents that took place. Sometimes the targets would appear out of nowhere, and the Soviet jets were raised to go into the air to intercept them, and the radar stations would follow on the strange objects, UFOs, but they never were able to figure out what those targets actually were. Sometimes such target would respond, but most likely there was no response at all. Sometimes the interceptors, the aircraft that was sent to intercept them, would find the target, but as soon as the interceptor jet would approach the target at a distance where the automatic missile launching system air-to-air would work, that system stopped working. But at the same time, the target would immediately disappear or vanish, and then immediately reappear in another area. And as soon as the UFO would vanish, the automatic missile control system would start working again. The aircraft would again approach the UFO, and the same experience would take place. When Reshetnikov entered the military institute for the improvement of knowledge, so to say, to get better training, he found out that that military institute had conducted UFO research in several directions, and they also were studying cases of the failed intercepts. He said that in the armed forces, all such cases are studied with very practical goals. If there is a UFO in the sky, it is being recorded by radars. Sometimes you can even see such targets visually. Sometimes local population reports about such UFOs. Also, such information comes from the border guard units, if this is a visible object, and also other sources. I think Reshetnikov meant the KGB. None of the sightings remained unrecognized in the entire aircraft units and are thoroughly checked and verified. But according to Reshetnikov, this is routine activity, and what's missing is the scientific approach. Most likely it is studied through the practical point of view, and he thinks that that's how the situation is in all other branches of the Russian armed forces. Of course, some military branches are trying, to the extent possible, to collect as much information about the phenomenon, which needs to be studied. And according to him, this issue of the UFO phenomenon has to be studied at the high government level. More and more people today start believing in the existence of UFOs. But what or who is behind the objects? The first thing that comes to mind are the aliens, extraterrestrials. Now, General Reshetnikov told the interviewers that at the end of 1970s, he himself had to go to the Arctic area, to the forbidden city of Norilsk, where there were reports about strange cigar-shaped flying objects with portholes. That's what the local media described. And I have, in my previous presentations about the Arctic Russia, all the information that I've collected, and this is fascinating. But Reshetnikov did not know everything that I have collected. What he does says is that an object like that, or objects, appeared in the area several times, and allegedly there were traces of the landings, but no serious research had been conducted to find out what's going on. So Reshetnikov himself flew to the area of the alleged landing on an, using a helicopter. Together with a group of officers, he was twice in the area, but nothing specific, according to his words, was discovered. As for the cases when the jet interceptors were sent to encounter UFOs, as long as the Soviet Union existed, he said, all military were obligated to do the following. When the unidentified targets appeared, the jets were immediately sent to intercept them, and the pilots were given permission to act without any limitations. Today, it's not so. Due to the economy and costs, the commanders do not really want to get interceptors out in the air when the UFOs appear. But, says the general, despite such difficulties, he himself more than once sent out interceptor jets to find out what the unknown target is doing. And in many cases, the targets were really mysterious and enigmatic UFOs. And Soviet systems down on the ground registered them too. And in some cases, said Reshetnikov, weaponry was used against UFOs. Now, another information from my files, and this comes from Vasily Alexeyev. Major General Alexeyev at one time was the head of the Center for the Space Communications of the Air Force, Russian Air Force. In the 1980s, he served in the General Staff. His work was connected to the continuous visits to the different military units stationed all over the former Soviet Union. And while he visited such units, he often heard stories about observations of very unusual phenomena. Keep in mind, said General Alexeyev, that at that time, much of the cited objects or phenomena was just refuted. This subject was considered to be secret and closed. But when such similar objects cases took place on Earth, or at an altitude which was not too high, the eyewitnesses who had seen it wanted to know what it is and tried to discern what was true and what was fraudulent or hoaxes. At those years, not quite often, whatever took place around you was treated in such a way that people who had reported such things were just reluctant to believe anything. And many of such people by then decided not to believe any explanations for the unusual phenomena and just refuted the fact of existence of such phenomena. Or to put it in common terms, the Soviet government did not want people to study UFOs and did not want people to believe in UFOs or other strange phenomena. This had to do with Marxism, Leninism, all other ideological nonsense. And also, as I told you before, they were concerned that people saw military tests, which we were not supposed to see. But let's get back to Alexeyev. According to the general, information which came from many armed forces units, did create very much interest. Just because it wasn't just plain rumors or hearsay. There were concrete eyewitnesses for every event. And it was documented in special forms. And their information about UFO sightings were in official reports. Sometimes such information had such convincing and fascinating character that you could not toss it away. Usually such cases were thoroughly checked, and not only through the efforts and the means from the defense ministry, but also other government structures. It's obvious, continued Alexeyev, that every new weaponry system, be it a nuclear missile or an airplane with previously unknown characteristics, were something that, are up to date, high tech, cutting edge fire, and some of the most interesting determinations of the progress of mankind. And there where such systems exist, UFOs come more often. What's interesting is that the officers from the command of the areas where the cutting edge military technology was stationed, they had no instructions to study UFOs, but they did it themselves and registered information about every case of UFO sighting using whatever means they had, and they registered such information. The general also stated that in some cases such commanders were able to create situation which helped attract UFOs to visit them. They noticed that the mysterious guests would appear over military objects at the time when the military technology was involved in highest activity. It's like the UFOs knew that there was transportation of the military technology, or special cargo would be delivered to the area. And then they found out that if you create visibility or appearance of such an activity, or even if the local commanders would create a schedule of such work, the ubiquitous visitors would be right there. What it means is that they, the aliens and the UFOs, somehow knew about such events. Moreover, there was information that some of the testing ranges which tested newest military equipment, they knew how to make contacts with UFOs. This happened in the following fashion. Sometimes a UFO would appear over this testing range. Usually it had the shape of a sphere, but there were other shapes too. If at that time the contactee, for example, would hold a rifle in his hands and would direct it or point it like a pointer to different areas, the UFO, reacting to the gestures, would change its form, would flatten out in the appropriate direction. Or if the person 3 times would raise the rifle upwards, the UFO 3 times, accordingly would elongate itself vertically. Very interesting, and I've talked about it before, and I'll talk again. Now, according to Alexeyev, in the 1980s, due to the instructions of the Soviet government, UFO research had begun using technical means, theodolites, radars, and others. On all the many cases of the UFO presence, they were registered and information written down with the help of devices and different apparatuses. In his view, said Alexeyev, the order for such research came about because there was so much information coming from all the armed forces branches about various information about UFOs. For example, there was such a case. One of the institutes, secret institutes in the vicinity of Moscow, had its scientists fly to Novosibirsk to study an aviation disaster that took place. When they came back, they told their superiors very unusual story and had a report which contained collected information about UFO, which followed their airplane. Now, being scientists and professional researchers, they started to observe UFO and in a very intelligent way. They followed the UFO, which followed them, and they told everything that they had recorded and observed. They put down in writing the story, while the other ones from the scientists were drawing the UFO, so-called, from nature, seeing it. And yet other ones were making sure that the time sequence was written down. Because of this such scientific approach, they were able to prepare a document which has incredible scientific and practical value. In essence, this was the scientific description of an experiment which took place in real conditions. This is very interesting. In the book UFO over the planet Earth, or НЛО над планетой Земля, there is information collected from 3,000 people. This was the book written by Marina Popovich, whom I mentioned in my other presentations. She says that the number of people who had observed UFOs in different countries just after World War II is hundreds of thousands. Once she was writing her books about flying saucers, said Marina Popovich in one of her interviews, she started talking to people whose duty it was to observe anomalous phenomena. Much help she received from Major General Vasily Aksionov. And she also said something which the general did not say, that he was a commander of the super secret Soviet research program for UFOs. Now, I think everything goes back to the Setka program, but I may be wrong. There may be more information out there. And Marina Popovich, who is over, I believe she's 82 years old, it would be great to bring her one day to the United States and other countries and to have her speak. And if I can, I'll someday help it happen, but I'm not sure if she'll come. Now, General Nikolai Antoshkin, hero of the Soviet Union, he was formerly deputy commander of the Air Force of the Russian Federation for military training purposes. This was his basic duty and mission. He has a lot of awards. He's a doctor of military sciences. He's a professor. And I won't go into all of them, but he stated that he personally and all of the regiment had observed a flying, gigantic, radiant object which took off, gained incredible velocity, and disappeared. He also saw a large burning object in 1969 in Belarus. His personal opinion is we are being controlled by space aliens. Now, again, Antoshkin is a very qualified person. He graduated from the Military-Air Force Academy. He was a major when he was commanded to become in charge of the Odessa military region, and much more that he collected. He had served in Germany. In 1983 he graduated from the Military Academy of the General Staff of the Air Force USSR. He also worked to save the area in 1986 during the Chernobyl explosion, and the first 10 days after the explosion he was personally in charge of the activities from the pilots to diminish the effects of the explosion. He also flew around the reactor and received his large dose of radiation. So this is not a simple person to look at. And he was convinced about UFOs, like I told you, and there are others, and I'll mention them in the future. Thank you.